Hi, welcome to another Real Food Traveler podcast. This is Courtney Drake McDonough. I'm the publisher and managing editor of RealFoodTraveler.com, a culinary travel digital magazine. As you know, we usually talk about food and travel in conjunction with each other. Today, we're focusing more on travel, though, and we're talking cranes. In fact, the Great Crane Migration, which happens every spring in Nebraska. And we recently published an article on the site about the crane migration. But I wanted to talk to somebody who works with the cranes and this whole migration all the time and really find out a little bit more about this natural phenomenon. So we're talking today to Andrew Caven, who's the Director of Conservation Research at the Crane Trust in Wood River, Nebraska. So, Andrew, thank you for joining us today and talking about the cranes. Sure. Now, at the time of this recording, it's mid-February. Actually, it's Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day. And so I know we're right on the cusp of everything really happening with the migration. So let's talk first a little bit about the Crane Trust and, as Director of Conservation Research, what does that mean you do there and what does the organization do?
Well, our organization was formed as a result of a legal settlement over water in the Platte River in 1978. The National Wildlife Federation and the state of Nebraska were suing Basin Electric for a dam that had been approved already and was nearly completely constructed because it was going to impact whooping crane habitat in the Central Platte River Valley. And the Endangered Species Act was new in 1972, and one of the first species they tackled with a large focus in defining critical habitat was the whooping crane. And it designated the Central Platte River Valley, where we are today, as critical habitat, meaning it was very important or essential to the continuance of that species. And that was how we got money to form. So basically, instead of holding up the dam's construction, the three parties came to an agreement to pay to have habitat restoration and protection work done in the Central Platte River Valley to offset the costs of the water taken out of the North Platte and eventually the main stem Platte River. And so it's our mission is to protect the Big Bend reach of the Platte River for whooping cranes, sandhill cranes, and migratory bird life. And it faces a lot of issues. So there's a lot of historic change on the Platte River. It used to be over a mile wide, especially at flood stage, and pulse up to 30,000 cubic feet per second. And now it doesn't really do that anymore, and it's about, a wide channel now is about 400 meters, but much of it is much less than that. We've seen 90% declines in parts of the channel, and it used to be all wet meadow, which has also been largely turned to agriculture. So as an organization, we work hard to advocate for keeping flows in the Platte River from a political standpoint, but we work even harder to do land restoration work, that we do some clearing of invasive species in the river valley, disc up the river, which is complicated and I can explain later, but we actually drive a tractor through the river when the water gets low and vegetation creeps into it so we can keep the channels wide, and we restore prairie and wet meadow from crop field with willing collaborators, private landowners and such. So that is what we do as an organization. So we started out really focused on the whooping crane, but it happens that one of the greatest migrations left in the world, the sandhill crane migration, also goes right here through central Nebraska. In fact, a lot of other birds do. A large percentage of the greater white-fronted geese population, of the northern pintail, which is a species of duck, of the buff-breasted sandpipers, long-billed dowitchers, all these interesting water birds. A large number of them come through the Central Platte River Valley on their spring and or fall migration. So that is sort of what we do.
Wow, and so definitely a bird lover's paradise there, it sounds like.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
it is.
So you touched on this, but what kinds of cranes migrate to the area? Because I always, in years past, really just heard about the sandhill cranes, and I was surprised with the article that we published to find out that there are multiple species of cranes that come through.
Well, there are, but they're actually, the other ones are sort of, aside from the whooping crane, which the Platte River is one of the main stopover habitats for the whooping crane. The other species of crane that come through, like the Caven crane, are sort of vagrant, as we call them. They're sort of, the sandhill cranes actually migrate all the way over to Siberia, and every once in a while, a Eurasian species of crane will come back with them. And that's happened, most commonly with common cranes, but can happen with a couple other species as well. But regularly in Nebraska, you find sandhill cranes and whooping cranes. And there's also leucistic cranes, which are a weird sort of a color morph of a sandhill crane. But we have lots of different birds.
And I don't know much about birds, so why would there be such a variety? I mean, is it, to take from that old saying, birds of a feather flock together? I mean, is that why multiple kinds all come through together?
That's a great phrase. You know what it is? It's all about wetlands. So the Great Plains, we've lost, like the Platte River is just one example. But the basin wetlands heading south of the Platte River as you head south across Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas, they have a different kind of wetland. They have riverine systems like we do, but most of the quality stopover habitat in those states are basin wetlands, which are basically large flat bowls that there's a clay layer in the soil and water pools there in these low depressions, and it creates wide and marshy habitats, which is the favorite habitat of both species of cranes for roosting, and they also both forage there. But whooping cranes in particular need those wetlands for foraging as well. These species of cranes migrate through the central flyway, and they need to find this wetland habitat. But over 60% of the basin wetlands in, say, Oklahoma, for example, have been lost, and of those that are left, over 90% are in some denuded form. So we really have lost a lot of prairie and wetland habitat throughout the Great Plains, which has made migration challenging for a number of these waterbird species. So it may lead to actually more of them concentrating in fewer spots, but a whole great host of shorebirds, ducks, cranes, and herons, egrets, and allies, all of them, a lot of them in the Great Plains come through the Central Platte River Valley and use those basin wetlands on their migration. So we sort of don't exist in a bubble, but in a large complex of wetlands that span the Great Plains from Texas up to northern Canada.
Just a little bit of an aside, because something you said made me wonder about something I see here in Colorado. We used to see the Canada geese come through at a certain time, and then the majority of them would leave. But we're noticing more and more of them are staying. And we don't have a lot of marshlands, but we have a lot of lake areas. So do you think that's why, because of increasing shortages of these areas that they would normally have gone to?
Well, that is very interesting, and I'm not really an expert on Canada geese. But what's interesting about Canada geese is how adaptive they've been. One thing I can say is they've changed their ranges as we've had warmer winters. They're sort of an ice pusher, If there's open water, they'll sort of be there, and they're also very adaptable, so they can eat a lot of just grass in a park. So. They have definitely extended their winter range north, and we've seen more and more residents, and that's probably endemic to their own behavioral characteristics. But one thing we have seen is them moving further north, and I think the limiting of wetland habitat in the Great Plains is sort of affecting a host of species, and I can't really say exactly how that's affecting Canada geese, but as the waterbird sort of guild, I know that there is a lot of them have had a lot of waterbirds select for larger complexes and diverse wetland complexes that have several wetlands near each other, diversity in landscape characteristics and stuff, and those really quality natural sites are fewer and further between than they were even a couple decades ago. But you compare it to 100 years ago, and it's drastic.
Well, thank you for indulging that question. And I'd imagine that because we've got readers all over the country and really all over the world, that maybe some of these listeners have witnessed similar things, and have kind of wondered why the birds are hanging around so much more than they used to. So that explains it. Back to central Nebraska and the crane migration, how long have these water birds been doing this path and coming through Nebraska?
That is very interesting. There's fossils of sandhill light cranes that go back about 10 million years in Nebraska. However, the Platte River wasn't even in its current course at that point. So it's sort of been a long progression. Cranes have been migrating through the Great Plains and stopping here for a very, very long time. The number of sandhill cranes was at about 500,000 in 1982. And has continued to climb since then, but we don't have perfect estimates. But if you go back, to the turn of the century, it was maybe 20% or less of that value. So they've really increased in number over the last century. They're one of the few birds that have really done well in the modified landscape because they can eat corn. Now, they can't live off corn alone, and that's sort of a misconception, but they've done well in the modified landscape, and so their numbers are larger than they were historically. So when you ask how long has this migration been going on, well, it's been going on a very long time, but the species of crane and the character of the migration has certainly changed over time. The migration, Nebraska's rivers have really settled into their present course even in the last 30,000 years, and since humans have changed, the Platte River has been shifting courses really pretty variably, but going throughout southern Nebraska, and was probably always a valuable stopover area for sandhill cranes. And there's probably been extensive wetland around the Platte River Basin in some form or another for millions of years in southern Nebraska. I say about 2 million years. I tell people that there's been a migration that is somewhat similar to what's going on now, but certainly in the last 20,000 years, but even in the last 100 years, it's changed a lot in character. It's gotten bigger in terms of number of birds, and actually the habitat's gotten smaller.
Well, what is it that keeps them returning to the same area year after year? I mean, is it that it's innate, or that how do they know? How do they know to keep coming back?
That's a big question. They could, I think if, instead of growing corn, if someone turned the faucet off on the Platte River and there was no water and people quit growing corn, I think they would adapt and find a new staging area. It wouldn't be good for the population, but historically, if you go way back to when the Platte was just, in the 1860s, pre-development, this really wide, extensive, braided river with a lot of prairie and wet meadow and marsh around it, they would have had quite a feast here as well at that point. And it's sort of called a staging area. So usually in the first portion of the migration on the way north or on the first portion of the migration on the way south, water birds and cranes in particular do this staging behavior, and sandhill cranes stage for a very long time in Nebraska in the spring. They don't do it in the fall in Nebraska, but whooping cranes will also stage less conspicuously and for less long a period of time, but they'll stage in Quivira National Wildlife Refuge and Salt Plains in the Southern Plains, which is also National Wildlife Refuge in southern Saskatchewan. So this behavior staging is sort of you're on your way during migration, and you take an extended stopover where you really build up calories in a quality habitat, and it can also have a lot of cultural significance for the birds. Like sandhill cranes have a very strong social hierarchy, and they recognize their family members via their vocalizations, and they actually have a strict hierarchy where older paired adults are higher in rank, and they don't even breed till they're 3 or 4 years old. And some of these unpaired sort of subadults are sort of lower ranking. You see them really get picked on. Everybody thinks, oh, all the cranes are dancing, right? But a lot of it's aggressive behavior. You can see particularly these you see birds getting kind of pushed off a good roost location or whatever. It's often one of these younger birds, but there's a lot of cultural significance to the Platte. So I established real quickly that they have a complex social organization and hierarchy, but they also find their mates. Often these 3 or 4 year old birds will find their mate. They'll pair bond on in the Central Platte River Valley on their way north. So not only is this an important place to stop on their way north and feed, it's also important to the species for pair bonding. And it's been documented that in the native wet meadows, they do certain pair bonding behaviors they don't commonly do in agricultural fields. So this habitat is very much a part of their life cycle for sandhill cranes. I think I covered that. I don't know what else to add there.
No, that's very interesting. And do they mate for life?
They generally do, but they're about as monogamous as birds get, I would say. And they actually both rear their chicks. They both spend about equal time with their chicks, and they do mate for life. But sometimes they split up after they have an unsuccessful nesting season. And if one dies, they will remate. But there's a lot of reports of if one gets injured or attacked or killed by a predator, say like an eagle, the member of the pair who remains alive will often stay in close vicinity to its dead mate for a while before it leaves. So I mean they clearly have strong pair bonds. It's pretty rare that eagles kill cranes, by the way, but we have seen it on the Platte River. But they have other predators. I've watched coyotes hunt them, and unsuccessfully most of the time, for sure. They're quite strong birds. They can actually, their bill could go right through they'll aim right at the eyes of a coyote or a feral dog or a domestic dog going after them. Their beaks are quite sharp, and they can definitely poke your eye out or injure a dog or a person,
Huh. Well, I was just about to say that it was very fitting then, inadvertently, that you and I were talking about this today on Valentine's Day, because, these birds pairing up in this area during this time and mating for life. But then you talked about coyotes and smashing through the eye, and that kind of harshed my romantic mellow.
But they are really lovebirds, I guess you could say, huh?
Yeah. So talk about the time frame for their arrival and therefore when you recommend people come.
That's another story which is kind of interesting. It has advanced and become earlier in recent years. You're still a really great time to come is the middle of March. And into early April is sort of the end of the migration. And increasingly, mid-February, you can find significant numbers of cranes. I've done my first survey of the year, first aerial survey, and we have well over 10,000 here already. So historically, you often saw the first arrivals in mid to late March. If you go back to the 1920s, say, today you often see the first arrivals at the end of January or early February, and you have significant numbers by the end of February, which didn't used to be the case. The migration has gotten earlier. It's likely linked to climate change, but you also have factors such as agricultural waste grains, which give them a food source they wouldn't otherwise have when it's really cold in the winter. So there's probably multiple factors contributing to that. You come in March to visit, and you're going to see cranes. Put it that way. Just March the whole month. That's what I tell people. Okay. They're like, well, I want to come at peak. And I'm like, well, I've seen peak from March, the peak of abundance, over 500,000. We've seen that from the first week of March to the first week of April. Like March 8th or 5th, somewhere around there to maybe April 3rd or 4th. So you're going to see a lot of cranes.
Okay. What are some of the things that people are surprised by when they come to watch the migration? And I'm talking anything from how early they have to get up to the temperature and the noise, that kind of stuff.
All that is, you said it. I mean, it's being, they are incredibly loud, and their vocalizations can carry across several kilometers. They have this historic modified trachea, and communication and sound is clearly very important to them. You have certain birds standing sentry all night. They kind of rotate. Seems like some are sleeping, resting, and there's others awake at all times, and there's always one or two making an alarm call in the middle of the night. And so you see, they're never really quiet on their roost. They are very, very boisterous and loud, and it only gets louder when the sun rises and they wake up and start dancing around and picking up sticks and throwing them in the air and fighting over good spots with each other and et cetera. So they're very loud. That surprises people. It can be quite cold. I tell people to bring a lot of layers because, the whole march in like a lion, out like a lamb sort of thing. It's very true in Nebraska. We can easily get down to -5 at the beginning of the month, and we could have snow at the end of the month too. But sometimes some marches it's already greening up at the end of the month, and it's starting to feel pretty nice. It's very unpredictable weather. We're really in the center of the Great Plains, and you can have a front come from across the northern plains north of Montana and through Saskatchewan there, push cold air right down through Nebraska, and you can also have warm air come up through the southern plains and the southeast and really bring a nice warm front. And that's when the cranes like to migrate. When you have some warm wind out of the south, they'll really take those thermals and fly with them heading north.
So why did they pick up sticks and throw them?
A little bit of a display. I've often seen it before. A pair does some kind of pair bonding rituals, some bowing to each other, circle around, and it could be a display of fitness to some degree. There's like, look at how good I am with my bill. There's been some good writings about it. Tacha, Tacha, I never know how to say that name, is a really good researcher who did a whole monograph of sandhill crane behavior. That's from about 20 years ago, but covers all these different behaviors, and people could find it and read it if you're really into cranes and you're coming and you want to learn something about their behavior before you get here. But there's some nice drawings online too, different behaviors. You can watch behavior all day. That's how, I give a lot of tours, increasingly less, but especially when I was new here. I've got too much research going on now, but if fundraising for our conservation efforts, if there's a big donor around, I'm out giving a tour and such. And so I've watched cranes so much that I really get wrapped in the drama between them. They have a lot going on socially, and that's sort of what keeps it interesting watching the cranes over time.
That's so cool. Well, that leads perfectly into my next question. Then tell me why you personally find it so amazing to be doing what you do and the whole crane migration experience.
Well, I just love ecology, so I love understanding what habitats species need. And cranes in Nebraska fascinated me. I moved up here from New Mexico. I'm from South Dakota, but the previous 5 years I was in New Mexico, and I've been here on my 5th year here. And I was down in New Mexico doing some really interesting work, but I saw an opportunity up here to work in Nebraska and look at the relationship between landscape level habitat features and sandhill cranes, along with a lot of other interesting things. We also have a bison herd, and we do a lot of different management techniques to improve our prairies and restoration. Use a lot of fire, controlled burning and such. So it's a really interesting job. And, the cranes are a big part of it, but they are a part of it. We got a whole really interesting ecosystem that's very threatened and endangered. Less than 3% of the tallgrass prairie in Nebraska is left untilled. And, we're protecting some very large tracts of lowland tallgrass prairie. And people come for the cranes, but they stay for the diversity of things that this river valley can offer. As a biologist and ecologist, the cranes, it is one of the world's greatest migrations. I mean, in terms of vertebrates, it's easily one of the, 3 largest that still remain, and there's a bat migration in Africa and a wildebeest migration in Africa and the sandhill cranes in North America. And really, those are the first 3 people mentioned, particularly the wildebeests and the cranes. There's very few things this gargantuan and big and striking left. We hope we can preserve that for future generations, because hopefully it's not something you have to read about in a book someday and it doesn't exist. So that's exciting. But there's so much to this ecosystem in terms of the prairie diversity. Very, very high. Our 6,000 acres here, we have over 500 species of vascular plants, and we get nearly 300 bird species come through. The cranes are the star of the show, though, the sandhill cranes in particular. And when a whooping crane shows up, but they're pretty stealthy. We can have 40 or 50 whooping cranes stop in a regular migration. The most we've had is over 100. I think it was about 130 stop in one spring migration, which is wild. I'm considering there's only 500 left. So, a huge proportion of those birds stopped on the Platte River in a recent migration. We're here technically to protect habitat for the whooping cranes, but sandhill cranes create this amazing spectacle in March and are the star of the show, and that's what brings people here. It gets them to invest in conservation and to keep the ecologists here like me.
It's so cool to think that this is happening, and so many of us around the country don't get to experience this unless we go to Nebraska and witness it, and that there's this opportunity every year to do it is very, very cool. So if people want to know more about the migration and more about the Crane Trust, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Our website has a lot of great content, and there's a number of staff on there. It's just cranetrust.org. Checking that out. Our visitor center has a ton of promotional materials as well, which we sort of have 2 offices. We have one, the resource office where I am, where people sort of do research and land management and such. Then we have sort of a public face, which is our nature and visitor center, which has a lot of really knowledgeable people who, especially in March, are ready and very willing to provide a ton of information if you stop in there. They always have their phones open as well and are easy to get a hold of, and a lot of general questions the Nature and Visitor Center can, for a normal question about cranes and the migration, will give you a pretty good answer. And if you got some really weird questions, then they'll forward you on to us.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us, taking a little bit of your Valentine's Day and grant writing time to talk to us for Real Food Traveler. I encourage all of our listeners to go to that article on our site and learn a little bit more from a visitor's perspective of what she experienced when she went, but definitely to reach out to Andrew and everyone mentioned and go experience this very, very cool thing. If it's hopefully this year, and if not, there'll be other years, but we encourage people to go this year. So Andrew, thank you so much for your time today and for being our guest on the Real Food Traveler podcast.
Oh, it was a great pleasure. You have too good of questions. You really really got me thinking. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to listening to more of your shows in the future.
Well, thank you. And to our listeners, if you go and you get a chance to encounter Andrew, be sure you let him know that you heard about it on the Real Food Traveler podcast. That would be fun. Thank you, and happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day to you as well.